G'day, we're halfway through the F1 season and boy have we had an amazing 14 rounds. So in this video, I'm going to recap what I've seen at the track in every one of those rounds, starting off with Bahrain. Our first race of the year and the explosive allegations about Christian Horner sent by email to most of the people in the media centre. This story is still going, but it was certainly big news back in Bahrain and overshadowed most of what was happening on track. One of the biggest pictures on my page over that weekend was this one of Christian kissing his wife, Jerry Halliwell Horner, before heading off to the grid for that first race. And the race result from that weekend, Max Verstappen from Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz. The week after that, we're off to Saudi Arabia and more drama in the Red Bull camp with Helmut Marko being threatened with the sack after allegedly leaking documents about Christian Horner's behaviour. But the super story that weekend was Carlos Sainz having to have his appendix out and being replaced by a rookie. Yes, Oliver Bearman, British driver, had his first ever drive in F1, performed admirably, scoring points for Ferrari and getting through the race unscathed. And indeed you can purchase one of his signed prints at kimillman.com, each print numbered and hand signed by the young Brit. And the race result that weekend, Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc. And at that point, we're thinking Max Verstappen's going to win everything again this year. Wasn't to be, because the next race, Australia, in Melbourne, Max has a technical issue with his car. And that is the first time in so many races that he's experienced that. And I remember vividly the crowd coming to life and cheering when they realised he was in trouble. Miraculously, Carlos Sainz, who'd recovered from his appendicitis operation, ended up on the top step of the podium with Charles Leclerc second and Lando Norris third, and it was our fourth Car-Lando experience. But what about the other big story that weekend? Alex Albon crashing on the Saturday and then taking over his teammate's car for the race on Sunday. Logan Sargent, well, he was left to sit out that race and watch his teammate Alex Albon just miss out on points, finishing in 11th spot. For race 4 of the season, we're off to Japan, to Suzuka, in cherry blossom time, and that was pretty unusual because normally we're racing at a different time of the year. Come race day turn 2, Alex Albon and Daniel Ricciardo come together and are out for the race. And things were back to normal with Max Verstappen on the top step, followed by Sergio Perez and Carlos in third. Speaking of Carlos, we head to China for round 5 and a big crash in qualifying for the Spanish driver. I was at that last corner when he spun and headed off into the barrier. Disappointing result for him, and he wouldn't finish on the podium that race, but Lando Norris would. It was his equal best race finish. A second behind Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez third, and Zhou Guanyu, the hometown hero, lapping up all the love from the crowd post-race. Let's go now to round 6. It was Miami's turn, and it was a remarkable weekend because it was the first time that Lando Norris chalked up a race win. It was an absolute thrill to be there. After the race, he was straight over to his crew. They hoisted him above their heads. He lapped up every moment of it, going to the press conference afterwards, and then back down into the stadium because the paddock is actually located inside Hard Rock Stadium. And there, a large audience, including an opposition team principal in Fred Vasseur, more than happy to wear a McLaren cap for a moment to celebrate Lando's first win. And yes, there was plenty of bubbly to be poured all over him. Oh, and the other big story from the day was Donald Trump rolling up. Now, some of you don't like him, I understand that. He was there with a big security contingent and ended up in the McLaren garage, soaking up the atmosphere before heading out onto the track for the pre-race ceremony. Oh, and another story from that race, Kevin Magnussen, Logan Sargent coming together at, turn 2 or 3, and Logan ending up out of the race and into the barrier. For round 7, it was back to the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix in Imola. Such a beautiful track, and it was the first time I laid eyes on Charles Leclerc's dog, Leo, which has been a huge hit on social media. Max was back to his winning ways, leading home Lando Norris with Charles Leclerc in third position. Next up, round 8, Monaco. Huge weekend, noted for a couple of crashes. The first one was a boat that actually ended up on the dock. This was a water taxi being driven in the harbour without any passengers. The driver, who was standing at the back, accidentally floored the accelerator. He fell off the back of the boat. The boat was out of control, ending up here, much to everybody's surprise.
All our guests were sitting behind me here, and I was kind of looking at it, and I just saw this speedboat coming full speed, coming around the corner, and it was happening so fast, but at the same time in slow motion. I was kind of like, what's going on here? And the next thing, he's bouncing off everything. The fenders are flying everywhere, and he crashed into the boat on his starboard side, hit this little boat on its port quarter, hit the dock and slid across, and then went into the back of this boat. The guy that was on gangway watch in the boat next door to us, he was actually staring straight down at it, and it was coming straight for him, so he had to jump out the way real quickly. The boat got on top of the dock, and the outboards were still the throttles were still in full throttle motion, so the outboard was still spinning. Once that guy jumped over, he ran over, pulled the kill cord, and killed the engine. So yeah, that's basically it.
But the bigger accident by far was Sergio Perez. He ploughed into the barrier about 100 metres on from me. There was tremendous damage. He was lucky to get out of that crash without too much injury. And there was much talk and chatter in the paddock afterwards that would be the end of Sergio's career, despite him having his contract extended earlier in the season. And on the subject of driver movements, early in the year, Lewis Hamilton confirming he would be going to Ferrari in 2025. The Hulk was announced as the first of the two Audi drivers. Oliver Behrman got the nod for one of the Haas seats. Esteban Ocon was confirmed for the second, and Carlos Sainz was announced as Williams' second driver. That just leaves 3 teams looking for drivers, Alpine being one, and I think it's going to Jack Doohan. And the other 2 are Mercedes and Audi. But come the end of the race, it was an absolute Hollywood story with Charles Leclerc, the hometown driver, winning his home race in Monaco, much to the delight of the huge crowd in attendance. Second, Oscar Piastri, and third, Charles' teammate, Carlos Sainz. For round 9, we headed across the Atlantic Ocean to Montreal, and there we endured some ordinary weather. But the thing that stood out to me, apart from George's first pole position of the year, was an incident where, on the Friday, the police were turning people away from the track, saying that the day's activities weren't going ahead, which was absolute rubbish. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people believed what they heard. Some didn't even get on the trains at the station to get to the track. They were dissuaded well prior to them getting on trains. Turns out the whole day went ahead. And then on the Sunday, more drama, with a whole lot of people who'd waited many hours in a position on the main straight, had black mesh put over the fence, denying them any view of the track. The organiser came under a lot of heat for both of those incidents, and hopefully that doesn't happen again in years to come. Come race day, a crash saw Logan Sargent ousted and facing a long walk back to a motorcycle to pick him up before Max Verstappen won the race, with Lando Norris second and George Russell third. For round 10, it was off to Spain, and the big story that weekend wasn't what was happening on track, it was what was happening in the paddock, because a fire started at the back of the McLaren hospitality suite. I was actually having a bite to eat out the back there, and we were told very urgently to evacuate. And sure enough, the fire started above the kitchen, took hold. Thankfully not too much damage, but it put that facility out of action for the whole weekend. It meant drivers had nowhere to change. They had to end up using different rooms in the engineering motorhomes, but it didn't do them too much harm because Lando Norris scored a second position behind Max Verstappen, with Lewis Hamilton third. For round 11, it was off to Austria, the Styrian Alps, in a beautiful setting for a Grand Prix. Come Saturday at the sprint race, the start was delayed because race control decided that photographers standing where we have always stood for many years were suddenly in a dangerous position. That decision was made moments prior to the start of the race. With the cars lined up on the grid, photographers were still being moved out of the way, and hence they had to delay the start, with the cars having to do another formation lap, thereby reducing the sprint race by a lap. Come race day, it was George Russell who covered himself in glory, winning the race after Max and Lando came together at turn, 2 or 3, depends on how you look at it, up the top of the hill. Both cars suffering damage, allowing George to overtake them and chalk up his second win of his Formula One career. Round 12, we're off to Silverstone, or Silverstone, depending on how you call it. We had Brad Pitt and all the crew from the movie doing a lot of work both on track and in the paddock. This race is one of the biggest races for celebrities, and as usual they turned out in big numbers. But the story of the weekend was indeed Lewis Hamilton's first win in 2.5 years. He was absolutely pumped, as you can imagine, in front of his home crowd, and it was a thrill to be there and bear witness to that event. Second, Max Verstappen, and Lando Norris third. The Hungarian Grand Prix was remarkable for the drama that happened in the McLaren camp, with Lando Norris having secured pole, was beaten to the first corner by his teammate Oscar Piastri, who then continued to set the pace until an interesting pit strategy meant that Lando Norris actually jumped Oscar via his pit stops. Then there was some drama on track with Lando not giving the place back immediately, and in the end, Oscar Piastri did chalk up his very first win, but it was a rather disappointing way to win. Certainly when I was photographing the podium, it was clear that Lando wasn't that happy and neither was Oscar. It was a win, but it wasn't a win. And who was third? Lewis Hamilton. And the final race, one equally as dramatic, the Belgian Grand Prix, with Lewis Hamilton ending up with a win, even though he crossed the line second, with his teammate George Russell crossing it first. As it turned out, George's car was underweight and he was disqualified. 2024 has proved a remarkable season, and I'd like to think that the second half of the year, well, it's really only 10 out of the 24 races, will be as interesting, perhaps even more dramatic than what we've seen thus far. Certainly, Formula One is lapping up this new excitement and tension on track. I imagine viewer numbers on television have risen dramatically, and we're in a situation now where Max Verstappen is not guaranteed a win almost every race. I have a video coming up where I talk about what it would take for Max not to win the 2024 championship. And certainly he's odds-on favourite to take out that crown. But that's not to say it can't be won by another driver. And obviously Lando Norris is the obvious one, as he's closest to Max in the standings at the moment. Now, before you nip off and buy an Oliver Bearman hand-signed, hand-numbered print, or one from a number of other drivers, could you please hit the subscribe button? And if you haven't liked this video yet, good time to do it right now. Thanks for watching, and stay passionate. G'day from downtown Burbank, where things are really kicking off here, and we're going to get stuck into what is the most amazing F1 year in the history of the competition.